Parents, the following program is intended for people over the age of 13. If your kids are younger than that, please use the YouTube Kids app. Peter Bernard's Scary Stories for Adults.
Welcome to Scary Stories NYC. I'm your old pal Bigfoot. Today we've got a special hour-long Best of Dogman episode for you in order to welcome in Thanksgiving and the holiday season in the scariest way possible. We hope you all have fun plans coming up for Thanksgiving, and don't forget Friday and Saturday, Black Friday and Saturday after Thanksgiving, those American girls are appearing live on stage at the Northeast Comic-Con in Boxborough, Massachusetts. If you have a chance to come out, please do. Before we get to all of that, we've got this all-new story sent in by a viewer who wishes to remain anonymous. It's alleged to have taken place in a location very closely associated with the holiday that Americans celebrate this time of year, Thanksgiving. In fact, this is where the holiday was supposedly originated, but apparently, at least according to the person sending this tale in, it's also a location that at least he associates with the Dogman. You can hear more about all that in this all-new story we like to call The Mayflower Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, there's a place in Massachusetts called Plymouth that is the location of the original colony set up by the Mayflower Pilgrims. Just south of there is a big park called the Miles Standish State Forest. This was where I decided, when I got sick of the human race, to go visit. I felt that a few days or a week of communing with nature would help lessen the emotional pain I carried with me on a daily basis, having to live among my own kind. I didn't enjoy feeling so unhappy toward my fellow man, and this trip was meant to alleviate that. I didn't know that all it would do was reassociate my fear and loathing from humans onto the proto or semi-humans, colloquially known as Dogman. So, as I said, I was in the mood to be a hermit for a while. I had just had a breakup, I was unhappy with the coworkers at my job, and I was feuding with several family members as well. I was feeling quite abandoned by a cold and narcissistic human race. It wasn't just that I felt like nobody would care if I lived or died. It was more like both my nephew and my cousin told me specifically that literally. They told me they didn't even care if I was alive. I knew I couldn't rely on other people for my own sense of well-being anymore, and that I was going to have to start from scratch, relearning my sense of self-worth and my will to live in general. So I arrived at a camping area over there, and I was immediately brought right back deep into my feelings of alienation from my own species. The place was so full of garbage that I couldn't find a place to camp that wouldn't require an hour of cleanup before I even could set up my tent. I was also disappointed how close the campsites were arranged, right on top of each other, and I decided to go hiking deeper into the woods and find a more secluded place to spend the night, someplace without restrooms or plumbing or civilization's benefits and detritus. Off I went, tramping into the unknown in a very unprepared and angry way that I would suggest nobody listening to this ever does. In fact, it's bad to do anything in life the way I did that. Never do anything in anger if you can prevent yourself from doing so. No matter how badly life is treating you, Once you act out of anger, life is going to start treating you worse. It might even send Dogman your way. So I set up camp in a clearing in the woods not far from a pond, as the night was already coming on. It felt very private as I set up, as I ate something, and as I climbed into my sleeping bag and got ready for some sleep that would never come. I say it never came because the moment I laid my head down, from outside, there came a long, low howling. It was a different kind of howl than I'd ever heard before. It was as though a bear were howling like a dog. Whatever that was out there, wolf, dog, or whatever, it had to be large. It sounded so remarkably sad that I couldn't tell if it was in pain emotionally or in a physical sense. I mean, this cry was mournful. I shivered all over and could not get warm in my sleeping bag. The sound of the canine howling was so frightening to me that I felt my body heat diminishing, just as though it had dropped to freezing outside, which it most definitely had not. I discovered I had to relieve myself but was too afraid to leave my tent. After some length of time, I could no longer hear the howling, and I decided to take a chance going outside to do my business. Cautiously unzipping my tent to look around, I saw nothing outside but the night. I practically ran to the nearest tree and did what I had to do. The night was quiet, other than the crickets, and I was feeling less frightened by the second. I even felt a bit embarrassed for having been so scared over some dog howls. It seemed ridiculous as I finished up and prepared to return to my tent. And that's when I saw the eye shine. Almost directly in front of me, deeper into the woods, I could see two bright, glowing, yellowish eyes staring back at me. It was so unbelievable that I stood there for some time, trying to understand what that was. I didn't think it was really what it looked like. I was certain it was some sort of optical illusion. It couldn't be someone taller than myself, with glowing animal eyes. That just wasn't possible. And then, those eyes blinked. I let out some pathetic-sounding little cry, and then I saw those eyes coming through the woods toward me, accompanied by the sound of the forest being torn through by some large beast. I screamed like a small girl when I was a fully grown man, and I ran back to my tent. As I climbed in, I looked one more time in the direction I had just come from, and I saw it. It was for about 2 or 3 seconds total, and even that might be stretching it, but I saw it all right. It was surprisingly close to what I had envisioned in my head when I heard the howling. It looked like a cross between a dog and a bear. It was too large to be a dog, and it was too fast to be a bear. It was standing and walking on its hind legs, and walking quite smoothly and gracefully. It was a dark color, probably dark brown, and it was heading straight for me. I slipped into my tent, zipped up behind, then began praying. I was kneeling down and praying silently. For some reason, I was trying to be as quiet as possible. I'm not sure why, since the thing obviously already knew where I was. I could see the outline or silhouette of the Dogman on the side of my tent, apparently cast by the moonlight. It was right there, a foot or two away, and it was smelling the entire exterior of my campsite. I kept praying, but now I included open weeping with my prayers. The big beast howled one more time, right outside. It was so loud, it hurt my ears, and gave me that much more to cry about. Then, after the howl was done, I heard the only thing worse than the howl of a giant bipedal wolf. I heard the howl returned. From off in the wilderness, the sound of another monstrous beast howling made me feel certain that I was in the process of being surrounded by these werewolf-type things. When they howl, they're calling to each other, letting each other know their location, and sometimes calling the pack together. At least, that's how it is with real wolves and canines, so I imagined then and now that this is how it is with lycanthropic dogs as well. In other words, he called them, and therefore they were much more likely to come. I accepted the fact that I might soon be completely encircled with dogmen, and that my only defense would be a thin, polyester tent flap. I'm not a psychic, but even I could predict the outcome of that conflict. I grew very sad, and knew that as bad as things were, it seemed as though they might be about to become a whole lot worse. I waited, listening for the sound of the approaching dogmen. I looked through my stuff for something I could use as a weapon, but I found nothing. It was going to be my hands and my feet against their paws, their claws, and their fangs. Nevertheless, I had no plan of giving up. I was going to attempt to hold my own for as long as I could manage. I hunkered down and waited, listening for large creatures approaching the tent. And I woke up in that same position, stiff and with an awful pain in the back of my neck. I must have fallen asleep like that. It was light out. I had lasted through the night. All I can figure is that when that dogman howled, and then the other one howled back, the second one must have told him about something more interesting than me. Like maybe the second one howled about a large pile of salmon sitting unguarded. Maybe it talked the dogman stalking me into going to see it and do something else. Maybe I got that stiff neck for nothing. The dogman might have already left while I was sitting there panicking. I got out of there alive, but humbled. I only survived because the predator got bored with me. That dogman could have taken me out in a second. So, really, it wasn't that people were terrible. It was that nature is terrible, and humans are a part of nature. It's a dog-eat-dog-man world, and if you're still alive, don't worry. That will be corrected sooner or later. I told my few remaining friends the story of what happened to me, and of course they made fun of me for it. Because I said it took place in Miles Standish State Forest, they called it the Pilgrim Dogman and the Mayflower Dogman. They mocked me for telling a story they considered ridiculous, and they were just generally very jerky about it. Since then, my expectations for people have been drastically lowered. I try to forgive them. I try to ignore them. They don't treat me any better, and they have the same tendencies to gang up on me, lie to me, stab me in the back, and lie about me, smearing me constantly. The main difference is that I no longer expect anything good or decent from the people I know, and for that, I can thank the Mayflower Dogman.
Come see those American girls perform semi-live in hologram form on stage at the next Northeast Comic-Con. Meet Batman villains from the Gotham TV show. Watch Will Brierly's artificially intelligent cartoon character interview celebrities. See Debbie, Sophie, Alicia, and Chibi perform on stage. All this plus so much more.
Breaking news just added to the show are these stars: Dana DeLorenzo, star of Ash vs. the Evil Dead, the greatest horror comedy series that will ever be. Shake the hand that ended the second lives of so many Deadites. Also, Marty Ross of the New Monkeys, Denny Lane from Wings and the Moody Blues, co-writer of Mull of Kintyre. He will actually come hang out with us mortals.
Hosted by the king of pop culture himself, Gary Summers. That's the last weekend of November 2019 in Boxborough, Massachusetts, home of the Wolf People.
Dogman. In my bedroom. Dear Scary Stories NYC. I have a Dogman story for you that doesn't even make sense to me, but it was the most frightening thing I ever lived through. One night, back when I still lived with my parents just before I went away to college, I woke up hearing something or someone in my room. I thought it was the family cat, but then I remembered she had passed on a few months prior, and that realization woke me up completely. I cautiously peeked around in the room, trying to identify the cause of the noises I was hearing, when my eyes saw it. I wanted to scream. I didn't though, because this thing was massive. It was in my room, and it didn't seem to realize yet that it had awakened me. Its interest seemed to be focused inside my closet, where it was poking around, either investigating or else searching for something. Now, let me describe exactly what it was that I saw. It looked like a large man-shaped person or animal, and it was entirely covered with a fairly long, wavy hair or fur, which was dirty and knotted and matted. It was mainly black but had light or white-colored tips on the ends of the long fur. It had a broad back, and the hair seemed to naturally part right along the creature's spine, either growing out to the left or the right. It had a tail like a dog, which seemed to move as though it had a mind of its own. It was not a fake tail, just tacked onto a costume. It seemed real, and if it wasn't, then it was a pretty magnificent fake tail, I'll say that much. If this was a costume, it was the best costume, one created by a professional and a true artist. It stood up and turned around. I froze. I kept my eyes mostly shut, but open just wide enough that I could still watch the thing. It stared at me through pitch black eyes, apparently trying to figure out if I was awake or asleep. I used all my concentration to continue breathing slowly. When I wanted to scream, there would have been nowhere to run to once it realized I was awake. It was standing between me and the bedroom door. The window behind me led to a 2-floor drop if I decided to go that route. I chose to continue pretending to be asleep and just pray that the monster went away before I became unable to keep up the ruse. The thing had the look of a shaggy dog, with droopy ears flopping down on either side of its dog-like face. This was not a werewolf. It was a were-dog. No wolf was ever this long-haired or shaggy. The thing examined me, and I made mental preparations to leave this mortal coil. I accepted that this might be the end for me. The creature took a step in my direction, and I felt certain deep inside that a whole lot of pain was about to happen. Then, the animal, or whatever it was, reconsidered and darted out of my room. It looked as though it turned the corner as it left, heading toward my parents' bedroom. I gasped in horror and stood up out of bed. I might have been a coward when I felt personally threatened by the creature, but the idea of it doing something to my parents was abhorrent to me. So I stood there and screamed. I shouted for my mother and father. I tore out of that room, getting my foot tangled in my blankets and falling face first onto the floor. I got up as fast as I could and ran into the hallway. There was no Dogman out there, or anything else out of the usual. I ran to my parents' room, my socks slipping on the smooth floor. It was hard to gain traction and move forward, but once I was in their doorway, I discovered both of them sitting up in bed, looking confused and upset. I assumed at the time this meant the Dogman was in the room, so I charged in, ready to give my life in order to save theirs. The thing is, nothing else was in there. Nothing at all, just them and their room. Both my parents wanted to know why I just scared the crap out of them and woke them up out of a deep sleep. This was a question I suddenly didn't have a really good answer for, so I made one up. I told them I had seen a prowler in the house, and I thought he had entered their room. My father rose out of bed and grabbed his Louisville Slugger. Together, we inspected every room and every closet on the second floor of the house. Then, we repeated the procedure down on the first floor. If anyone was in the house with us, they were doing a really good job of hiding themselves. I have no idea where that Dogman disappeared to, but my parents began referring to this incident as my prowler dream. I still didn't think it was a dream. I had insomnia from then on until I left for school. Once at the dorms, I could sleep normally again, but I never got a good night's sleep in that room at home. Even when I would go back to visit on holidays, I would ask to sleep in the guest room instead of my old bedroom, until my mom got the hint and switched the two rooms' purposes. Now guests visiting would sleep in my old bedroom. I don't know if any of them ever experienced anything strange in that room, because I never asked. To this day, I've never told my parents about that Dogman. To them, it was a prowler that I imagined during sleep paralysis or something like that. To me, though, it was then, and is now, the night that I saw Dogman in my bedroom.
Don't go anywhere. We've got another scary story right now.
Dogman is a supernatural and mythological construct. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I like some of your stories, but others I can tell are fake and that you're being played by the people who send them to you. There is often an easy way to tell if Dogman stories are real or not. If the person claims their eyes glow during the day, that is fake, as they only glow at night. If the storyteller claims the Dogman is just an animal, they are making it up or confusing something else for the Dogman. Dogman is a supernatural kind of thing. It is not an animal born looking that way. It is always, and I mean every single time, the result of someone evil trying to do something bad. Dogman is not a natural creature, and in fact, cannot exist for long in our natural world. For you see, Dogman is a supernatural and mythological construct. I'm in my 60s now, and I've been interested in cryptozoology, ufology, and anything strange or weird since before it became fashionable. Well, since before cryptids became fashionable at least, UFOs were in vogue even before I was born, it seems. When I was younger, I believed that UFOs were nuts and bolts spacecraft from other planets, because that's what the books I read suggested. I felt that Bigfoot was a real animal unknown to science that would eventually be captured and explained. I felt that every mystery in the world was explainable by science, even if some things were going to take a more sophisticated kind of science to explain. While I concede that this all may still be possible, that science may one day explain even the deepest mystery, I have to say, I no longer expect the answers to come as easily and as quickly as I once did. I now suspect that, to understand some of these phenomena, we're going to have to evolve not just into a new way of thinking, but quite possibly we might need to evolve into a new form of being. And the humorous thing to me about all this is that my opinions and views have evolved over decades in spite of the fact that I've never seen a UFO and I've never seen a Bigfoot. If one has strongly held views about stuff that one has never actually seen, isn't that getting really awfully close to a religious point of view? I think it's important to keep a sense of humor about oneself. Quite often when our intentions are most serious, that may be when our behavior becomes the most foolhardy. Now, I've told you that I never encountered a Bigfoot or a UFO, as far as I'm aware. I didn't say I'd never seen anything strange, though. I have seen something extremely odd and inexplicable, and in fact, this sighting or experience is the main reason that my views on Bigfoot and UFOs have changed. In fact, my entire life changed on the day that I saw what I think must have been a dogman. I want to make it clear before I relate this narrative that I did not believe in Dogman before I saw it. Like many people interested in the strange back in those days, I believed in Bigfoot, but laughed at those who believed in Dogman or Pukwudgie or name the cryptid of your choice. In that era, I was considered wildly open-minded simply because I believed in both UFOs and Bigfoot. I knew people who believed in Bigfoot and some who believed in UFOs, but none of them believed in the possibility of both except me. Things are a lot less like that now, but back then, most fields of the strange were very compartmentalized in that way. And people who wrote science fiction or monster stories didn't believe in any of this. So it was a different time. I've said that I saw the Dogman, but in truth I saw him or it twice. That's part of the high strangeness of the phenomenon, at least to me. The only 2 days of the past 10 years that I forgot to bring my cell phone with me were the 2 times that Dogman came to say hello. That's only one of a number of odd synchronicities between the 2 events. The first story happened in 2011. I was dozing off in my chair and watching television. It wasn't late at night, but I was just tired and passing out early, like maybe 8:30 or 9 at night. My wife was fussing about and watching the same TV show I was nodding off to. The landline went off, and soon my wife was handing me the phone and telling me it was my mother. I was kind of out of it, and it took a while for me to understand that she was saying the electricity was off at her house. She was asking if ours was on or off. We were fine, so it either had to be a very localized blackout or maybe just her house. I agreed to come over and help out. My wife got me the good flashlight and our emergency battery-powered radio with batteries she'd been keeping in the fridge. I warned her that in the worst-case scenario, I might need to bring my mother and her cat back with me to stay with us for a while, and then I drove off into the night. Once I was in the car, I wanted to call my mother and tell her I was coming, but I realized I had left my cell phone at home. The best way to get to my mother's place from mine back then involved a little used old 2-lane highway number 45 that ran along the woods in Nashville. That's Nashville, Indiana, not Nashville, Tennessee. Now, as I came around some trees and looked ahead down the road, I saw a man standing on the side of the highway, waving his arms over his head. I naturally started to ease off on the gas, thinking it might be someone in distress. As the car slowed and I got a closer look, though, I could see that this was not a man. I was looking at a large, hairy creature standing on its hind legs with glowing eyes, apparently reflecting my headlights. It was the most terrifying thing I'd ever seen, yet it was behaving like a stranded traveler. I slammed my foot on the gas and screamed in fear as I got out of there as fast as I could. When I got to my mother's, it turned out that the electric wires heading toward her house had been cut. We almost walked right into them in the dark. We would have been fried. I got her back to my place, then called for repair people to come out to fix things up. I didn't tell anyone about the sighting at first, but I eventually had to tell my wife because it wouldn't stop bothering me and nagging me. I kept having nightmares about it. I couldn't believe I had seen this werewolf type thing and that it had been trying to flag me down on the side of the road. My wife's opinion was that it was some form of sleep paralysis, but I wasn't paralyzed, and I was driving. I certainly hope I wasn't asleep when I was doing that. So now fast forward to almost 3 years ago, when my wife and I were driving home from my mother's wake. We were both in a somewhat somber mood, and I was extremely sad, obviously. For this reason, my wife had offered to drive and I had no objection. As I was staring out at the world whizzing by, coming to terms with my loss, I saw something that immediately broke me out of my depression and sent me into a bit of shock. I pointed and asked my wife if she saw it. She started to give me a lecture about not interrupting her when she was driving, so I pointed more and asked louder, "Did she see that thing?" From the sound of her surprised gasp, I could tell that she did, in fact, see what I saw. And what I saw was a very large, man-shaped, hairy thing with a dog-like head, and it was trying to flag us down. It was looking directly at us with dark eyes and waving its hands over its head as though asking us to stop. I reached for my cell phone to take a picture and I couldn't find it. I searched around in all my pockets and inside the car, but I couldn't find my phone, and soon the dogman was far to our rear. I thought I had left my phone at my mother's wake and we talked about heading back. My wife said, since we were only a few minutes from home, she wanted to stop there, call back to the wake to see if anyone had noticed the phone, and then she could use the ladies' room before we headed back. That sounded like a good plan to me, so we went on home. Of course, once we got inside, we both saw my phone on the table near the door and we didn't have to head back. Because of the confusion over my cell phone, the second appearance of the dogman kinda got shoved to the background and somewhat forgotten about. One day, we were discussing the wake in passing, and our conversation fell back onto the dogman. My wife started giving her theory again that it was a hallucination. I asked her how, if it was a hallucination, she had seen it too. You know what her answer was? It was a mass hallucination. She actually said that. Of course, I don't have a better explanation for what happened twice. The only thing I can tell you for sure is that there's some other aspect of the dogman besides just being a predatory carnivore in the woods. There's something that we traditionally call paranormal or supernatural about him. I'm not sure exactly what I mean when I say that, but I know for certain Dogman is a supernatural and mythological construct. Dogman in the autumn leaves. Dear Scary Stories NYC. I have a story about the Dogman in autumn time that happened to me personally about 25 years ago. I'm just going to start from the beginning before I accidentally give out spoilers. I had just gotten finished with college, or I had gotten my undergraduate degree at least, and I was hiking back through Pennsylvania to my family's home in New Jersey. I could have chosen a quicker route and method, but I felt the need for some time alone before rejoining my family. I would get there before Thanksgiving, and that was the part they mainly cared about. I got to march eastward, watching the tree leaves get more autumnal as I proceeded. It felt very calming and zen as I managed to almost completely avoid human contact for weeks on end. It's relatively easy to be in a zen state with no other people around. I knew then and now that the real test is always to maintain your peaceful state once you come back in touch with those who would do things to insult your ego or self-image. As Ram Dass said, if you think you're so zen, go spend 2 weeks with your parents. I was trying to emotionally prepare for the broadside attacks I would expect to be receiving from various angles once I got within reach of my family's clutches, and it seemed that every year they would find something they didn't like about me which I hadn't anticipated them feigning offense over. No matter how prepared I was to deflect attacks and avoid arguments, they always seemed a bit more prepared to tear me down. One year, I decided to imagine them in their underwear when they said rude things, but my family are so unattractive that it just got me nauseous before the food was served. The next year, I tried to remember that they, like me, are part of the same consciousness and that we are, in fact, the very same being. Unfortunately, I got so angry at the manifestation of my consciousness called Uncle Joe that I had to be held back from attacking myself in another form, let's say. No matter how much meditation time I put in before the Thanksgiving holiday, I would inevitably sink back into dualisms before I'd even had one bite of the bird. So that year, when I was hiking, I had abandoned illusions that anything I did would result in my relatives treating me less harshly. I was trying to get calm before the event, as usual, but I knew it wouldn't work. So the hiking was a gift to myself to help me feel better before the emotional battery I was about to endure. The main difference that year was I no longer had any expectation of ever being respected by anyone related to me by either blood or marriage. I used to try to win arguments. I used to try to appeal using flattery. But this time, I would abandon it all and just focus on being present. In the present moment, I'd be able to note the hurtful statements. I'd be able to feel deeply how bad they made a part of me feel. But I would not have to be upset about the fact that I was upset. I could be in a place of peace within myself, making note of the entire process, but with the understanding that I was not the one being hurt by these nasty comments. I was the animating force behind the character or personality that the others would inevitably attack. Whatever was about to happen, it was nothing personal. As that idea went through my head, that phrase, nothing personal, I heard a sound in the night. I was in my sleeping bag in a tent somewhere in the woods in Pennsylvania. This tent did not have fancy see-through walls like a lot of modern ones do. It had thick, opaque tent walls. If I wanted to know what was making noise outside, I was going to have to unzip the tent and stick my head out. I wasn't sure I really wanted to do that, since 19 chances out of 20, it's going to be something harmless out there, like a deer or a raccoon. I felt worried about this sound, only for the reason that I heard it as I thought those two words, nothing personal. It felt to me as though the phrase, and whatever made that noise, were attached. I laughed at myself for acting in such a superstitious manner. After all, what I think has nothing to do with the outside world, right? In the middle of nowhere at night, your mind can start to work differently than it does in the bright light of day. I was unable to get back to sleep. I heard a second noise from outside, something like a thick branch being cracked. Maybe it was torn off a tree, or maybe it was stepped on by something with enough weight to crack it in two. I really wanted to know what that was. As quickly and quietly as I could manage, I unzipped the tent. I resolved to leave it open in order to be able to more easily stick my head in and out to monitor my surroundings through the night. If anything got too close, I could zip it back up again. Sticking my head out and looking in the direction of where I heard the thick branch or stick break, the moon was full and lit the area more brightly than the inside of my tent. I saw a young oak tree standing a few feet in front of the thick forest. I was camping in a small clearing, maybe 35 or 40 feet across, and I was on the west side of it. I was looking east at the small oak, whose leaves had all turned an auburn orange color. Many had fallen to the ground, but a lot were still left up on the tree. All of the lawn, except the very center part, was covered in orange leaves from the oaks and maples in that area. It was so thick that I could only see the grass or dirt beneath it in a couple of spots. Just like snow provides a field of white, this provided a field of red, yellow, and orange, even in the moonlight. I was about to pull my head back in the tent when something caught my eye. I stared, but could see nothing except for what I've already described. I sat up a bit and stuck my head all the way back out. As I did so, I once again got that fleeting impression that I was seeing something else out there, some man or at least humanoid form behind the tree watching me. But when I would hold still and squint in that direction, I would see nothing. I decided it was an optical illusion and pulled my head back in the tent. The thing is, as I did so, I could see the thing all over again. I laughed at myself. Now I'm seeing ghosts that only manifest when my eyes are in motion. That's a new one, I thought. Convincing myself I was being stupid, I rolled around in my sleeping bag to get as comfortable as I could, and I closed my eyes to try to get some sleep. Laying there with my eyes closed, I could still see the outline of the figure in my imagination. It looked like a werewolf from a movie, so obviously it had to have been an illusion. Werewolves don't exist, everyone knows that. Still, in my mind, I reran the scene over and over again. Each time it looked the same. Each time it seemed more as though that must be a real thing out there. But it was impossible. How could something be there and yet only be visible as I moved? I sat up suddenly. If something were camouflaged and colored the same as its backdrop, then if it held still, it might really only be visible when the individual looking at it moved. The change in perspective would reveal the creature's outline. So, that illusion out there might be real if it were an actual werewolf that happened to share the same auburn orange coloring as the leaves all around it and under its feet. My heart was beating fast as I tried to tell myself this was all nonsense. Half of me was convinced there was a dog-headed, hairy monster lurking outside under the full moon, and the other half of me was annoyed that we were losing good sleeping time. I wasn't really sure what to do. but my heart was beating like a caffeine fiend was playing the bongos. I tried focusing on my breathing to calm myself down. Then I heard another sound from outside. This was not the sound of something inanimate being broken. This was the sound of something very animate breathing. Just once, like an impatient snort or huff. It sounded like one of the great apes when they got agitated, to be completely honest. To me, in that moment, out there was either a man, an ape, or a werewolf. It was something the size of a large man, and I had no idea what kind of intelligence it possessed. Was this a carnivore? Was I on the menu? Or was this just something curious about me? I was in a pretty obscure part of the woods. Maybe this was one of the local creatures and just wasn't used to seeing campers. Maybe it was confused by my tent. Even though a creature that size obviously is always dangerous, maybe this one didn't mean me any harm. Thinking these thoughts calmed me a great deal and helped me to feel back in control of my life. I fished around for my flashlight, then pulled my upper half out of the tent. Again, staring directly toward the tree revealed nothing. I turned on the flashlight and shone it toward where I thought I had seen and heard the monster. At first I thought I saw nothing, but the way the shadows moved sure did seem strange. I climbed out of the tent so that I could shine the light on the tree while walking around. The very first split second I did so, my entire reality ripped itself apart and taped itself back together in a new way. Before I understood what it was, something exited from behind that tree and began running toward me. As it did so, I saw it in its entirety, lit by my flashlight, from its back legs to its pointed ears and everything in between. This was a dog, and an angry one at that, baring its fangs at me, growling, and advancing toward me with great haste. The thing is, it was running toward me on its back legs, while its front paws were splayed in the air before it, as though it were reaching out to grab me with them. If you've ever visited planet Earth, then you already know that dogs here usually run on 4 legs. They don't stand on their hind legs, and they don't try to grab you with hand-like front paws. So, even though I just told you that this was a dog, obviously, this could not have been a dog. Not a normal one, anyway. 3 different people I have told this story to in person or online have suggested to me that it had to be a bear, that I was just imagining things in the dark while I panicked. I don't know enough about how the mind works to rule that out, but nothing I can pull up in my memory banks looks anything like a bear. Also, do they make bears in the color of autumn leaves? This creature was nearly completely camouflaged by the leaves. I mean, almost like Predator. I'm exaggerating that to make a point. I'm not trying to say it used cloaking technology. I'm just saying the coloring made it nearly perfectly hidden. I don't think bears are colored like that. This was not a solid colored coat of fur. It was speckled or striped or something. I don't really remember. It looked like a large orange wolf or dog, or maybe even a really beefy sort of fox. But when it ran like that on its hind legs, it had to have been 6 feet tall or maybe even taller. I think seeing that approaching would have scared a 7-foot-tall man, as this was not a human. It was a man-sized beast, armed with claws and fangs, that it seemed intent on using. I either dropped the flashlight right there or shortly thereafter, because I remember running through the woods in the moonlight. I looked down at my hands for the flashlight, and it wasn't in either one of them. The dog man was approaching, so I tucked myself into an opening in the bottom of an oddly shaped tree. I pulled a nearby bush over me and ducked down as small as I could make myself. I could hear the creature walking around, and I wondered if this would be the end for me. In my way, I began to pray. I heard the creature walk back in the direction of my camp, and I wept in relief. I remained where I was on the damp, cold ground, holding a bush over my head, until I could hear birds singing and see the beginning of the morning starting. I had a number of cramps and sore muscles to deal with that day, but it could have been way, way worse. Although I didn't get any image or video of the creature, although I didn't get any of its DNA, and although I can't in any way prove that any of this actually happened, I personally think I had an encounter with a Pennsylvania dogman. And I think that possibly the most dangerous time of year to encounter a dogman would be in the fall, when they are so much better camouflaged. And I feel that way because I almost didn't survive. The dogman in the autumn leaves.
I'd like to take a moment to say that if you have a scary story you'd like to tell us here, you can write Peter at peterbernard.com, or you can call our new Scary Stories hotline number and leave it to us in the form of a voicemail message. It's easy to remember. 804-LESCARY. That's 804-LESCARY, or 804-537-2279.
The Nasty Old Woman and the Werewolf. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I have a story to tell you about something that I guess must have been a werewolf. It wasn't anything like the way they are presented in the movies, although on the other hand, it was just like a Hollywood special effect that happened in front of the eyes of everyone who was there that night. I guess the only way it'll make any sense at all is just for me to start at the very beginning. This is not your typical werewolf story for a number of reasons. Among those reasons is the fact that the logical place to start is when I walked into a small, fast food restaurant in a small town outside of a small city down in South Carolina. I was traveling from New York to Florida, and I had a 3-hour layover before my next train boarded. I decided to find a local eatery and have something substantial for dinner. After wandering around for almost 15 minutes, I realized the best option was this particular non-chain burger place. They seemed to be trying to copy McDonald's and KFC and Nathan's and everything else too. There were 3 people online in front of me, and they all seemed to be having a hard time ordering. Then, after each was handed a tray of food, they would file off to find a seat in the dining area. And as they would do so, they would pass this overweight old lady sitting at the first table. She would glare at them, give them a rude nickname, then make a prediction of what they would do, as though she weren't speaking loud enough for them to hear. "Skinny little dog can't wait to sit next to a window and look at her own reflection," she mumbled as one woman walked by. The woman did not sit down by a window or look at her reflection. The next customer to take his tray of food was a white-haired gentleman. As he walked past the chubby woman, she muttered, "Stupid old man gonna sit there scratching his butt." He actually stopped and looked at her before shaking his head and sitting down. He didn't scratch his butt, by the way, so the woman was not really very good at predicting the future. I wondered at first if she even knew she was speaking out loud or not. I realized she might not be sane, and I wondered if she might actually be dangerous in some manner. It was my turn to order, and I could see why the people before me had taken so long. The place carried all kinds of food, according to the fading, handwritten signs all around the ordering area. The first 3 dishes I named, though, they were out of. The waitress looked young, but sounded old. She didn't apologize when something was out of stock. Instead, she acted like I was a complete lunatic for thinking they would have that available. "You want what?" she would ask, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Why the hell would you think we had that?" Each time I would point to a sign listing that item and naming the price of it, and she would get more and more unhappy with me. It was as though she thought I had written the signs myself and posted them there just to annoy her. I eventually got what the white-haired man before me got, just so I could sit down. I had entirely forgotten about the mean, chubby woman, but she hadn't forgotten me. As I walked past her with my tray of whatever, she mumbled, "Mr. Picky Pants is finally done. Now Mr. Picky Pants is going to sit down and pick his nose." I actually heard 2 of the other patrons laugh at this. I felt kind of betrayed. I hadn't laughed when she made fun of them. It was as though she were winning the crowd over. And anyway, I wasn't even being picky. I had ordered the first thing they actually had in stock. So I sat down, annoyed, and ate the cruddy food. That mean lady glared around at all of us. I glared around at everyone too, and the rest of them just stared down at their food and ate silently. After a brief moment, the bells at the front door rang and in walked another customer. This was a lady dressed as though she were some kind of business executive, yet the way she carried herself was extremely upset and emotional. She seemed on edge, and I wondered at first if she had been in an accident. There wasn't a single smudge or tear on her clothing, and not a hair out of place on her head. She seemed out of place in that small town, but I reasoned that she must be traveling much as I was. When she got to the front counter, however, the waitress asked her if she wanted her usual, and she said yes. The cook greeted her from the kitchen and called her by name, but I've long forgotten what that name was. He told her to go sit down and he'd bring her food when it was ready. She thanked him, but didn't seem any less stressed out. I couldn't tell if she were sad, or angry, or grieving, or afraid for her life, or what. I tried not to stare, but I found her very confusing and mysterious. She seemed at once both the essence of sophistication and a nervous wreck. This unique lady walked toward the dining area, and the mean, plus-sized woman sitting there began muttering again. "Damn," said Ms. Smartmouth. "Look at the crackhead." Someone dropped their fork loudly onto their plate, and the rest of us gasped and gawked. I don't think any of us expected her to pick on this well-dressed woman, whoever she was. I glanced around, and from the looks on some people's faces, the urbane lady must have been someone locally famous or important. It was like time froze and decided what it wanted to have happen next before we all started breathing again. I don't know what everyone else was thinking, but I was wondering what the mean one was going to predict about the rich-looking one. Like she had predicted I was going to pick my nose, what was the fancy woman going to do? The mean medium opened her mouth to speak. All of my attention was focused on those unforgiving, hurtful lips. For some reason, I had never been so curious to hear what a complete idiot was about to say. As the woman began to utter her first syllable, the rich lady's face was suddenly directly in hers, less than an inch from being literally nose to nose. She arrived there so fast, it was almost like I had witnessed teleportation. The two of them glared eye to eye, the rich one bending over, leaning on the table to bring her eyes level with the others. I glanced around and almost chuckled when I noticed that the cook and waitress were even standing there, staring, wide-eyed. The entire place was silent. "Go ahead," said the important lady. "Finish what you were going to say." The seated woman slowly rose from her seated position to a standing one, and neither woman blinked. Neither woman backed off, and neither woman seemed to be aware that anything in the universe existed besides this hated other in front of them. I could see how much taller the stressed out woman was than the mean woman, and I really hoped that this was not actually going to reach the point of becoming physical. I saw that nobody else was going to intervene, and I asked myself at what point it might be appropriate for me to stand up and get them to stand down. Then that insulting woman screamed. It was so sudden that she stunned every person in there and almost gave us all a heart attack. And it wasn't just the suddenness and the unexpected nature of her scream that surprised and frightened us all so badly. It was that the sound which emanated from that woman seemed somewhat inhuman, or even unearthly. It could have been called a bellow, or even a roar, really. I have wished so many times since then that I had a recording of what that sounded like, so that it could be studied. I never heard that kind of a sound before from a human or an animal. It was so surprising that it caused me to blink my eyes and jump in my seat, knocking my drink over. By the time I had righted my glass and looked back up again, that chubby insult medium wasn't there anymore. The lady in the expensive designer business wardrobe was now looking up, and there was something else in the place where the mean little woman had been just a few seconds prior. I gasped and fell off my chair. It would have been comedic if what I was seeing wasn't so terrifying. Instead of the little rude and hurtful prognosticator, there was a hairy creature whose clawed feet were making deep scratches in the linoleum floor, and whose tall ears were tickling the ceiling. It stood like a bear, but the body shape was far more like a broad-shouldered human covered in fur and with a wolf-like head. It was not exactly a wolf head, just as it was not exactly a human body. The feet were definitely more like wolf feet and hind legs than human legs or feet. The front legs, on the other hand, were far more human-looking than any animal on Earth is supposed to be. The long snout was like a canine in some ways, but there were saber teeth protruding up on the sides, which reminded me of a boar. The nose was like a wolf or other type of canine. The eyes on the apparent werewolf seemed insane, and I climbed over my table to get toward the exit. I found that I was about the fourth to decide to do this, and that there was a log jam as we all climbed over each other to get out of there. I briefly caught sight of the waitress and the cook exiting through the rear, but I did not catch any more glimpses of the werewolf or the other woman. I ran to my car in the parking lot and sped out of there, wanting to get back on the highway as soon as I could. I thought that I would feel safe again once I was on the road, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. I looked over my shoulder and kept expecting to see that woman's face in a vehicle chasing after me. Or if not that, then I wondered if she would remain in her werewolf form and just chase me that way. I was starving because I had only gotten to eat a little of my meal before having to run out of that establishment, but I didn't want to take the risk of stopping anywhere. I didn't want to slow down at all. I knew I was being paranoid, but I couldn't shake that feeling, and I really felt like I was trapped in a Twilight Zone episode. It would have been impossible for her to catch up with me, but it was impossible for her to change into the Wolfman in the first place, and I had witnessed that. Or, to be really specific, I had seen her in her human form and then closed my eyes. When I opened them again, there was a tall werewolf-like being in the place of that woman. I never saw her transform. Maybe she didn't. Maybe she was replaced. Or maybe one or the other form was actually an illusion or projection. Maybe she only tricked our minds into perceiving her as the werewolf. Or maybe she really was the werewolf and the human form was the trick. Then again, what if there were two people or two entities involved in this somehow? I don't know what happened that night, and I've never had reason to drive over in that direction again. I'm still way too paranoid about what happened to even tell you where it was, but let's just say the Southwest. I'm convinced that if I tell you where I saw her, she'll get angry and come after me. I've never really been the same again after the night that I saw the nasty old woman and the werewolf.
Peter Bernard's Scary Stories for Adults will return.
The Invisible Demon and the Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I had an experience of something that felt very paranormal to me. My friend who was with me had an entirely different experience. I'll try to put both our stories together so that you can learn about the invisible entity and the Dogman. My friend and I used to live in towns on either side of the Tiger River in South Carolina. That's spelled Tyger, like the tiger in William Blake's famous poem. That made the place special to me. It always carried with it a sense of the magical. Now, I lived in Whitmire and he lived in Tuckertown. It was only 15 or 20 minutes for our parents to drive us between the two places, but when possible during summer vacation, we would walk the distance. It would take us 3 or 4 hours, even using our various shortcuts through the woods. I don't know if they were really shortcuts in a technical sense, but we preferred to avoid walking along the highway whenever we could. The air in the woods is far superior to the gas fumes along the highway. So, this is a story about us returning to Whitmire one late afternoon or early evening, cutting through the woods until we got to the Tiger River. We knew a spot where it was a bit shallower and crossed at that point, then rested on the other side. I think we might have even gone back in again or something, I forget. It was a hot day, and we used the cold water to cool down before pressing on. The sky was beginning to darken, so we knew we couldn't hang out there for much longer. We wanted to get back to my place before a horror movie came on television as well. This was back in the days before either of our families owned a VCR, and DVRs were still a faraway dream. If a movie came on at a certain time, you had to be situated in front of a television at that time, or you would miss it. They had no late-night replays back then either. No second chances back in the late 1970s. It was right after we'd left the area of the river when we saw it. It was the horror movie, basically. It had come to us. I'll tell you exactly what I saw once we got back under the tree canopy. I saw eyes. I don't just mean eye shine, but I saw eyes, and they were shining. Do you understand the distinction? I was looking into the darkness off in the distance, and I was watching something looking back in my direction. I started to point toward it to ask my buddy if he saw it as well, but he grabbed my arm and pushed it back down. His face looked frightened, so I knew he must have seen it too. I sped up my pace, and once again he grabbed my arm and slowed me down. We walked, terrified, through the woods, parading ourselves in front of something clearly twice our size, with bright glowing eyes. It never moved, and yet still, I was crying. I wanted to turn around and run, but that would lead us back deeper into the woods. We had to do what we were doing. Walk steadily, calmly, and hope the creature or entity or whatever it was didn't charge us. I stole a glance in its direction and I still couldn't make out a single detail of this thing other than its eyes. It didn't even seem to have a body at all. It just seemed to be eyes floating in the night. We finally passed the thing and it was behind us. I wanted so badly to turn around and look behind, but my friend wouldn't let me. He whispered that I should just keep walking forward and never look back. That was the hardest thing I ever did. We made it back to the highway and breathed the gas fumes for the rest of our trek home. It wasn't safe to go in the woods anymore after dark. We didn't actually talk about what had happened to us until a commercial break during the movie we watched later at my place. I referred to the eyes, and my friend was confused. I asked him to tell me what he had seen if not for disembodied demonic glowing eyes. My friend told me he saw the Wolfman. I laughed out loud. Like Lon Chaney? I asked him. He had to think about it. He said no, it was more like a dogman than a wolfman. That made me laugh even harder, but my friend wasn't joking around. He asked me to tell him what I saw, and I told him it was glowing eyes and an invisible man or monster. His response was that I had seen an optical illusion. It was a trick of light or shadow that led me to think the monster was invisible. According to what I can remember of his description of the thing he saw, it looked like the big bad wolf from the Three Little Pigs or Little Red Riding Hood. He said it stood on its hind legs, had a dark, furry body, tall, pointed ears, and a long, fanged snout. It was unclothed, and he felt certain this was a natural animal of some kind. He did not think we had an encounter with the supernatural. He felt we had an encounter with an undiscovered kind of predator, and we were lucky we got away like we did. I asked him why he was so certain that what he saw wasn't a trick of light or shadow. After all, a dog-headed wolfman isn't any more possible to see than glowing eyes on an invisible man. Hey, it's me, Henry Lee Dogman, here to thank those of you who support all of us here at Scary Stories NYC. It really helps us if you click like, and if you forward our videos or leave cool comments. If you can, it helps us even more when you let us share our 25-episode and growing collection of uncensored, scary Dogman stories with you by becoming a paid subscriber at peterbernard.com. That's right, join our monthly club and get 25 stories right off the bat, each of them wilder than what we're allowed to tell you on this channel. Then, each Sunday, get another new scary story, usually a Dogman story, but always uncensored and secret, available nowhere else on the planet. Please consider joining us today at peterbernard.com and keep the scary stories coming. Thanks, everyone.